Well, Team South Africa has been in Davos talking up South Africa as a competitive investment and business destination, as well as the virtues of doing business with the country while showcasing what it has to offer. Reputation First Managing Director Tshepo Matseba joins us now. Good evening and welcome, Tshepo. Straight out the gate, how does South Africa address one of the glaring problems? And this is the issue of power cuts with no end in sight, the daily crippling impact on many sectors across our country, especially businesses and jobs. How do you make that sound nice to investors?
Good evening, Iman. Thank you for the opportunity. There is no way of making it sound nice. I think what Team South Africa should do, and I think that's partly what they are doing there, is to be transparent about the reality that we're facing in terms of the energy crisis, and then articulate South Africa's just energy plan, because that's actually the blueprint that says, well, we're experiencing difficulties right now, much as everybody else actually has experienced the energy difficulties, especially in the UK. It's how you plan to respond to the crisis in the long term that will keep investors in South Africa. And so far, investors have not left in numbers. Investors have stayed in South Africa. They've adjusted. And when you look at the just energy plan itself, it is an opportunity that the Team South Africa should articulate consistently. And I guess that's why we see the Minister of Electricity in that environment. But indeed, as an investor, you would imagine that this is devastating. As a corporate that is willing to invest money here in South Africa, the energy issue is devastating and it needs to be addressed as swiftly and as quickly as possible. But it's in saying, what do I do in the short term? And importantly, what is the long-term strategy? And is that strategy sustainable? And this just energy plan comes across as a sustainable plan. And if implemented, it could serve as a blueprint for the world to actually shift towards a more energy-friendly, and environmentally friendly energy generation.
Or they could add a third leg to that, vis-a-vis an opportunity inside the crisis for potential investors, I suppose. But there are other issues at Tshepo as well, rising crime, labour crises, our logistics and ports crises, which we've talked about a lot over the November-December period. How do you present what you're saying they should do, the reality with the opportunity? How do you message that?
Yeah, I mean, look, fortunately, President Ramaphosa had already started collaboration with South African business in identifying three key priority areas, and one of them is logistics and the issue of crime, and then the energy situation. And so how do you position the reality of the logistics crisis? I think that we need to demonstrate that we've got teams that have identified the key issues that we're dealing with, the key challenges that the sector is dealing with, because unless you can articulate what the problem is, and unless you can demonstrate that you figure out what the problem is, at least you will not gain the confidence of any investor. The perceptions will go run wild, because you'll be leaving investors with the space to speculate about whether you are fixing the issue or not. And then the question of crime. Honestly, South Africa issues out this crime statistics, and crime is not an exclusive issue to South Africa, but it is bad in our country. You and I know with the type of statistics that we see, especially around violent crimes. But what we should be articulating, instead of just merely showcasing statistics every quarter and every year, we should be demonstrating practically how we are tackling crime every single day, and in small steps. For example, if you just focus on the city of Johannesburg and say, how do we eliminate mugging and robberies in those streets? Positive perceptions will begin to shift around the world. So it's not merely about statistics, but it's also about demonstrating practically that in the following areas there are incremental successes. And then there's I really said pathetic, but there's a terrible issue about corruption in the security cluster, in the police. And if you begin to put as many of those corrupt officials away, you'll be shifting perceptions about conversations around crime, so that people and investors can see that they are going into an environment that is safe, and while there are challenges, those challenges are being tackled, and they're tackled consistently.
Right, so those are, that's a compendium of the institutional issues. And then you have, issues relating to politics and diplomacy. How does South Africa's genocide case at the ICJ potentially affect its ability to sell the country? Does it hurt or enhance?
Look, it has two possibilities. In the extremist world, especially in markets such as the US, you are going to find people and groups and institutions that choose to say this is actually anti this and that, and therefore South Africa is a risk, and therefore we should disinvest. But in an investment environment, especially like AGOA, there's a give and take. So there's a benefit for the Americans when they invest here, and there's also a benefit for us. So it will be very difficult for the US to drive AGOA without South Africa, especially given the infrastructure and the sophisticated financial system that the country has. But at the same time, we need to be, it's almost one of those things that you want to address, but you become cautiously optimistic. Engage with the stakeholders. So conversations behind the scenes need to happen so that we don't talk to each other, talk past each other, and talk through the media and talk through social media. Importantly, that there should be diplomatic discussions behind the scenes. But the court, the World Court challenge itself, where South Africa is challenging Israel, is actually goodwill. It's an extension of South Africa's liberation attitude, and an extension of South Africa's attitude towards peace as a solution. As you've seen with South Africa joining the other African countries when we went, for example, to Russia, Ukraine. And at some point, while there has been some inconsistencies, but at some point South Africa did call what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, they called it actually, President Cyril Ramaphosa said explicitly that this is a war, and should not be labeled as other things like a conflict or anything. It's a war. And similarly here, because of the severity of the situation, the impact on children and women and hospitals of those bombardments in Gaza, this has now been labeled a genocide. And I think the world is empathizing with South Africa, and overall, therefore, it is a positive impact.